A figure stood in the creek, submerged to the neck, unmoving. The moonlight glinted across the water, sending shards of silver onto the jagged rocks beneath the surface, but the figure did not stir. I had been walking along the bank, boots sinking into the damp moss, when I first saw it, its head breaking the water like a dark stone, hair plastered and slicked back, eyes fixed on me. They didn't blink. They shouldn't have been able to stand there so still, with the current tugging at its shoulders, but somehow it did. The creek's cold bit at my ankles as I stepped closer, each footfall sending ripples toward the figure. I could see the fog of my own breath twisting in the air. Behind me, the forest was unnaturally silent. Not the usual night stillness, the kind that hums with insects or distant rustling, but a muted void, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The water around the figure swirled in subtle, unnatural eddies, defying the mild slope of the creek. I froze. My instinct screamed to turn back, but something rooted me in place. There was a wrongness in the figure's posture. The neck was impossibly straight, the shoulders too symmetrical against the current, as though carved from marble rather than flesh. Its eyes held mine with a quiet patience, patient and predatory, measuring the space between us, testing how long I would hesitate before I moved. Hello. My voice barely rose above a whisper, and the sound seemed to shatter the stillness, echoing faintly against the trees. The figure didn't respond. It didn't breathe. And yet, the water around it pulsed faintly, as if its presence alone could push the creek outward, nudging the surface into small, deliberate waves. I edged closer, moving along the bank where rocks and roots gave me some purchase. The cold seeped deeper, biting through socks and boots. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the temperature, but from the impossibility of what I was seeing. I wanted to see its hands, its torso, any sign that it was real and human. But the water blurred everything below the collarbone, washing detail into darkness. And then I noticed it. A flicker in the water, barely perceptible. The figure's reflection was wrong. The moonlight struck the surface, and the shadow beneath the head lagged just a hair behind the movements, or non-movements, of the figure above. A small delay, but enough to make my stomach knot. I stepped back. The forest seemed to press closer, the trees leaning inward at angles that shouldn't have been possible. One root snapped somewhere upstream, a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. I spun my head, searching, but there was nothing. The creek, the rocks, the dark expanse of water behind the figure, all remained still. And still the figure watched. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was someone fishing, late at night, frozen against the current while waiting for a bite. But no one could balance like that, perfectly upright, without shifting, without small micro movements that even the drunkest person would make. There was an intent in that stillness, a deliberate patience, and it felt wrong. The wind shifted. I felt it, first across my face, then across my ears, carrying a distant gurgle that was not quite the creek. Something stirred upstream, water bubbling against submerged rock, but the sound wasn't natural. It carried a rhythm, like breathing. And then the air seemed heavier, pressing down, damp and brackish. I realized with a surge of fear that I couldn't smell the earth. Only water, thick and iron-tanged, as though the creek itself had taken over the forest. I backed further, mud sucking at my boots. My flashlight, previously dull, flickered as if struggling to hold onto reality. Moonlight struck the figure again, and I saw its eyes. Glint, silver gray, reflecting the light too clearly, too perfectly. They weren't human eyes. They were mirrors, showing me not myself, but the shape of something I didn't understand. A movement. Just a twitch of the head, a tilt toward the current. My heart leapt. But the water around it didn't react. Ripples didn't spread outward. The figure did not shift in balance, it remained impossibly still. Only the water seemed to part slightly around its neck, shaping itself as though guided by invisible hands. I realized then what terrified me most. The figure's stillness was a lure. Every instinct in me screamed to look, to watch, to measure and analyze. And that was exactly what it wanted. I had been drawn close by fascination, not fear, and the forest had noticed. The branches above shifted subtly, leaning down, forming faint archways. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the bank, merging with the water. My mind refused to accept it, but I could see now that the forest itself was participating, nudging me toward the figure, urging me into the creek. I wanted to leave, yet my feet stayed rooted. Another twitch, its head dipping slightly, water dripping from hair slicked to skin. And then the eyes changed. They blinked. Not like a human blink, which is quick and fluid, but a slow, deliberate closing, taking seconds, holding the darkness inside them like it was swallowing something. And when they opened again, they were no longer reflecting me. They were reflecting someone else. Someone I had known. Someone drowned. A scream almost tore from my throat, but it caught in my chest. The figure's lips moved, tiny shifts, mouth just above water, forming no words but shapes of sound. I heard my name, not the syllables, but the vibration of it carried through the water, through the mist, through my bones. And then came the pulling sensation in my feet. I tried to step back, but the mud had become soft, adhesive, a suction that felt alive. My boots slipped, dragging me closer to the creek. Something cold brushed my shins. Water, yes, but thick, almost gelatinous. I stumbled backward, arms flailing, and caught a branch. It bent like rubber, yielding but resisting. My breath came in clouds, mingling with the mist that seemed to rise from the water itself. And all the while, the figure remained perfectly still, watching, patient, waiting. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision drew my gaze to the water upstream. Shadows rose where there should have been only rocks. Shapes, limbs, torsos, heads, emerged slowly, breaking the surface just enough to suggest life. They mimicked the figure. Balance against the current, neck straight, eyes fixed on me. But every small detail was wrong. Hands too long, fingers bending backward, heads tilted at angles no human could hold. The forest had begun to respond. The creek had begun to move with intention. I realized I was no longer alone. And neither were these things. My instincts screamed, and I obeyed at last, tearing myself free of the branch, slipping back into the underbrush. Behind me, the water erupted in a patternless wave. The figure did not move, but the reflection shimmered and split. Multiple images, all still, all watching. The ripples carried them downstream, closer, and each one was perfectly mirrored by the shadows leaning from the bank. I ran blindly, branches slashing my face, roots tangling my legs. Every sound, my boots in mud, the wind through leaves, was delayed, arriving a heartbeat late, as though the forest itself was folding time around me, catching and holding my fear. And somewhere in the distance, the creek sang with voices not its own. Whispering, echoing, calling. I reached a clearing and paused, gasping. Moonlight spilled across open ground, familiar now. The trees had stopped their impossible angles. I thought I was safe. But the water, oh, the water, still moved. And in the moonlight, I could see a single head, just barely above the surface, staring back at me from where the creek curved into shadow. Its eyes held mine, silver mirrors, unblinking, patient. And then I saw another. Emerging slowly, rising from the depths with impossible grace, the head joined the first. Its face, no, its face was wrong. Too smooth, too pale, lips parted in a smile that could not exist on a human mouth. The water glimmered around it, and for a moment, I thought I could hear breathing, slow and deliberate, beneath the surface. I stumbled back, but the ground had shifted. Moss, mud, leaves, they had rearranged themselves subtly, forming a faint pattern, concentric circles leading to the creek. I understood then, with a clarity I wished I did not possess. These things had been here long before me. They learned, they waited, and they called. The forest was a threshold, the creek a doorway. And I had been drawn too close. The two figures, now joined by more, rising just enough to reflect moonlight off wet skin, remained perfectly still, necks straight, eyes fixed on me. They did not move forward. They did not speak. They simply watched. And from the depths of the creek, faint shapes continued to rise, twisting, folding, imitating life in ways that should have been impossible. I fell backward, scrambling into shadows, unable to tear my gaze away. The fog rose from the water, mingling with my own breath. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to scream, to fight. But the forest held me in place, a gentle, inescapable weight, and the creek whispered my name again. I don't know how long I stayed there. Time became meaningless, folded by the will of the water and the patient eyes that never blinked. And though I eventually left the creek, stumbling into terrain that felt familiar yet subtly altered, I know they are still there. Always there, watching from beneath the surface. Waiting for the moment when curiosity outweighs fear. Sometimes at night, I dream of the creek. And in the fog of sleep, I can see the figures standing, submerged to the neck, perfectly still, their silver eyes reflecting me back, unblinking, patient. And in my dream, I know I am not dreaming. Something waits in the water, always. And when I close my eyes, I can feel it shifting, subtly, impossibly, just beneath the surface. Their tent was zipped shut with a thread made of bark. I discovered it first, the fine, fibrous line stretching along the zipper like some deliberate seam spun from the forest itself. It pulsed faintly under my fingertips, warm and slightly moist, as though alive. I froze, the mist around the campsite clinging to my hair and skin. Every breath rose in pale clouds, mingling with the scent of wet earth and moss. The world beyond the tent felt impossibly still. Do you see this? I whispered, voice rough. Mara's head popped from the sleeping bag. Her hair was plastered to her forehead with condensation. Her eyes widened, reflecting the pale morning light seeping through the canopy. What is that? She said. I reached for a pocketknife, trying to cut the thread. The blade pressed against the fibrous bark, and it resisted, bending without breaking. I tried again, harder, sawed at the line, and still it held. With each slice, it seemed to grow, fibers knitting themselves together, twisting tighter, as though the tent itself was exhaling through this single living seam. The forest around us was quiet, too quiet. Not the silence of a calm morning, but the absence of expectation, as if the woods had inhaled and held their breath. The trees leaned in, crooked trunks bending toward us. Bark knotted like skin, ridged with faint indentations that looked almost human. Branches reached over the tent, and shadows pooled beneath them in ways that didn't match the rising sun. I think, Mara started, and then stopped, staring at her hand as it pressed against the tent fabric. The nylon felt warm, taut, almost pulsing. It was as if the tent itself was alive, holding something inside. I could hear the faint creak of wood, not the wind through branches but deep, low groaning, like the forest adjusting, shifting. I stepped back. The thread writhed slightly, responding to my presence. I wasn't sure if it was the bark moving or if my perception was twisting, like the air itself had become viscous. I felt the pulse through my fingers again. It wasn't simply resistance, it was intention. The thread had grown here, sewn itself closed, and it wanted to remain. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to stutter. The mist thickened. When I looked around, the paths we had walked the previous day were subtly altered. Roots had shifted, depressions in the earth filled or flattened, and trees leaned inward, their branches bending just beyond possibility. Shadows no longer fell the way I expected. Sounds came delayed or early, footsteps that reached our ears before they were taken, branches snapping after we had already looked away. Mara tapped on the tent. The sound echoed oddly. It's moving, she said. Her voice was hollow, unnerving. I hadn't noticed before, but her skin had a faint roughness, like the bark that edged the forest. I recoiled. What do you mean, moving? I asked, trying to keep my own voice steady. She pressed her palm against the tent again, and this time I noticed the fibers under her touch twitching, stretching along the zipper-like veins pulsing in living tissue. Her fingers left faint impressions in the nylon, and the bark thread seemed to tighten in response. I tried again with the knife, slicing and sawing, but it was hopeless. The thread grew back, fusing seamlessly into the tent fabric. The fibers pulsed faintly, throbbing in rhythm with our rising panic. Each attempt left me shakier, and Mara's transformation became more pronounced. A patch of her forearm now bore the rough, striated texture of bark, and her voice had taken on a hollow echo, resonant and distant. I realized then that the forest wasn't attacking. It wasn't hunting. It was patient, observing, teaching. Our presence had been noted, acknowledged, and now catalogued. The thread was the boundary. We had crossed it, and the forest had responded. The morning light dimmed inexplicably, replaced with gray that seemed to radiate from the mist itself. I stumbled around the tent, checking the perimeter. Trees twisted farther than physics allowed, branches intertwining above us in unnatural lattices. Shadows pooled in hollows that had no right to exist. The earth beneath us subtly shifted, forming concentric circles that seemed to pull toward the tent. Mara sat against the side of the tent, silent. Her breathing was slow, deliberate, and uneven. I could see the subtle elongation of her fingers, knuckles bending in ways that should have been impossible. Her nails were dark and roughened. Her voice, when she spoke, sounded like wind rustling through dry bark. The tent, it's not a shelter anymore, she said. I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. The forest's pulse, so faint at first, now thrummed through every root and branch around us. The mist swirled unnaturally, coiling upward, thickening around our legs. The creaking grew louder, deeper, like a cathedral of wood moaning against invisible weight. The bark thread across the zipper pulsed visibly now, light faintly spilling from it, a heartbeat that I could feel in my chest. I understood, in a way too visceral to name, this wasn't a trap meant to kill. The tent wasn't a prison in the human sense. It was a cocoon. And Mara, she was becoming part of it. Part of the forest. I grabbed her arm, trembling. We have to get out. We have to leave. Her eyes met mine, unblinking. For a moment, I saw her clarity, her recognition of me. Then it shifted. Her lips parted, and the faint creak of bark-like tissue echoed where her voice should have been. She let go of my hand, rising slowly, not moving as a human moves but as something that had been sculpted from timber and fiber, bending the rules of motion with silent patience. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and fell against the underbrush. The mist enveloped me, chilling my bones. The pulse of the bark thread quickened, resonating through the tent, through Mara, through the soil. The boundary had been acknowledged, the warning delivered. I realized I had already passed it. I scrambled, clawing through roots, my lungs burning. I glanced back. The tent was changing. The seams seemed to swell, the fabric shifting as if it were breathing. The bark thread gleamed, pulsing in the half-light. The forest leaned closer, branches curling inward, forming a cage of living wood around the site. Even the mist seemed to hold its breath, waiting. And then Mara turned fully toward the tent, her silhouette half human, half bark, and entered. The fabric yielded around her as if welcoming her inside, tightening the thread across the zipper behind her. The forest exhaled, releasing a sound like wind through hollow trunks, a low sigh of satisfaction. I watched, rooted in place, as the bark thread wove itself fully across the zipper, sealing the tent again. My attempts to approach, to tear it, failed. The fibers were smooth and pliant, almost comforting in their cruelty. Mara was gone. Only the pulse of the thread remained, faint, like a heart beating under the forest's skin. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. The mist thinned slightly, the light returning in uneven patches. The forest seemed quiet again, the sentience withdrawing but not gone. The crooked trees and human-like bark remained, as if nothing had happened. And yet I knew better. The boundary had been reinforced, the message clear. I backed away, slowly, never taking my eyes off the tent. Its zipper was once again sealed with bark, pulsing faintly in the soft light, waiting. Waiting for the next arrival. And I understood, finally, that the forest didn't kill. It didn't need to. It absorbed. It transformed. And in the quiet, haunting calm of that impossible place, I knew that I was already changed too. My skin itched faintly with a roughness that hadn't been there before, my breath hollowed just slightly, my fingers trembling with the memory of the forest's patience. I left the campsite, following the path that had subtly shifted underfoot, disappearing into the trees that leaned inward as if bowing to some unseen cathedral. Behind me, the tent remained, a silent sentinel, zipped shut with a thread of bark, pulsing, alive, waiting. And somewhere deep within the soil and roots, I could feel the pulse of it still.